I hope everyone had a nice lunch and you're refreshed, refueled and ready to go. I'm a student of military of military history, should I say. Napoleon Bonaparte be one of my favourite military commanders, and he always said an army can't march on an empty stomach. So I hope I'd like to congratulate the catering staff. The lunch looked lovely, it tasted lovely, and we're refueled and ready to go again. So this afternoon's session will commence with a plenary session. And what a plenary session means is we're going to reflect upon the presentations that we received this morning and your deliberations facilitated by your facilitators at each of your tables. And we'll work it in three main areas. We'll just have general points. We've broken it down into three strands, kind of three main topics that were highlighted through all the 12 tables. And then we're going to get into the core of the plenary is the questions that you will have for our expert advisory group, for our local government specialists and our deliberative democracy specialists as well. So to commence, I'm just going to run through what Dublin meant to you as free citizens of Dublin. So you said that Dublin is a unique, multicultural and diverse. It's divided between classes and tribes, but is connected through pride. You said that it needs regeneration. It's constantly changing, growing and decaying at the same time, and has unfilled potential. The third kind of area we saw cropping up was that it was made up of many small communities with strong identities, fragmented geographically but connected in important ways. The fourth was, it's deadly. I'd agree. It's geographically and naturally stunning. And the fifth was, it's people and it's welcome. And the last, Dublin is the big city, the nightlife, the double-decker buses and the zoo. And yeah, I can relate to that too. So just before we move on, I'll say to let you know that we will, all the information that we've gathered, Art and his team are compiling it, and you will get it over the coming days, all the comments that were made, and that's really important that we share them with you. So there's three main strands that we want to talk about, and there's key points in each of those strands. The first strand one is we need to move away from central government and give power back to the local authorities, which are currently undervalued, underprotected, and not always respected. Along the same strand, the whittling down of local representation can be viewed as an effort to take power from the people and deliver it into the hands of the already powerful. Interesting. And finally, the last point we saw was that there's a lack of local control over service provision over areas such as health and education. Based on the 1907 Charter, this seems to have reduced over time. And these are really strands that we see emerging from not all, but what's representative of the 12 tables. The second strand was around funding, and we see that funding and budgets are the key. The rest flows from here. Any new system requires real accountability and transparency. If local councillors had more power, then it's likely local people would be more engaged. And the last point in this strand too is that people were surprised about the difference in spending on local government in Ireland compared to other countries. We need more detailed information on how other countries manage their budgets, and the tables that I sat in, certainly that was an emerging theme as well. And the final strand, that's come up now, is strand 3. And if local council was Cinderella, then that means central government is the evil stepmother? Question mark. Not a statement, it's a question. Local government structures haven't changed in 30 years, but the city has. We need to evolve, diversify, and look to the future. I couldn't agree more. And lastly, previous attempts have been unsuccessful, but we have high hopes for this process. We certainly do. I concur with that as well. So thank you for all that work done by the facilitators, and as I mentioned, Art and the Secretariat are compiling all of those strands, and we'll share them later on. Now, into the core of the plenary, and it's the questions that you have for our specialists on the advisory group. We had over 100 questions, We're not going to cover them in the next 25 minutes. So what we're going to do is we're going to compile all the questions, and we're following today's session. We're going to send them to the expert panel, and they have. It's great now. I'm a lecturer. I can give back to the lecturers. They're going to have some homework to do, and they're going to answer the questions that you posed, and then we'll share that amongst you. Is that okay? Great. All right. So, question for table 2, and I'm going to ask whoever's question that is, could you please take the microphone, if we go to table 2, Vincent Gormagat, and we'll hand that question over to table 2 for our expert advisory panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. We asked that question there, just how do you engage the democratic mayoral process with such low levels of engagement in local politics? And we've seen over the years, it's actually getting less and less people's interest in local politics. And some of the reasons for that is, well, we want you to explain that as well, but obviously people don't feel it's delivered in what it should be, you know.
Will I give a start to that? I think the obvious thing to say is, and it came up in the slide there earlier as well, that if local government had more meaning, it had more powers, it had more impact in local communities, then you would hope that people would become more engaged. Whereas at the moment, maybe there's a perception, correctly, that the local authority cannot do very much. It is linked to things like finance. If there was a local finance regime that was in place and people were paying money to their local authority, then I think they would have a big interest in how that money was being spent. Rather than a system where you have a lot of central funding going to local authorities and not even going in the form of a block grant. So it's not saying you're getting this allocation of money, do what you want. It's coming more in smaller pieces. You're getting this money for this project, this for that project. So in other words, central government is dictating the whole agenda. The other thing then, and this is a broader piece, I suppose, we're in education. I think it does come back to education. A lack of understanding maybe about what the demarcation is between our national government, our local government, what can a TD do, what can a councillor do. I mean, so much work of our TDs is work that should be done by the councillors. It's the pothole type work, for want of a better term. And some of that responsibility comes back to us then as voters, because historically we've seen in Ireland that if you're a TD and you focus on what you should be doing, which is national legislation, you attend all the committee meetings, you speak in the Dáil, you contribute to your debates, but you're not back in your local area for the weekend attending the funeral or the local GA match or taking care of a street light, you won't get re-elected. So a lot of our TDs, to some extent, are glorified county councillors, trampling on the space that should be left for the councillors. But it does come back to fundamentally, if you make local government more relevant, then presumably people will get more engaged, I think.
No, I think that's very fair. I think people need to, it's not that recently that we actually had councillors who were TDs. We had a dual mandate. It's not that long ago. I think 2002. 2001, yes, 2001 Act. So that sort of institutional lack of regard for the difference between local and central government has been built into the system for a very long time. I would be very hopeful, in terms of sort of that idea of low engagement in local electoral politics. I think any engagement is good. I think some democracy is better than no democracy. So I would be very hopeful that, as the system changes and local government is given more to do and local councillors have more oversight over more functions. And I think A's point about finance is fundamental. Like, if you think of it in a very practical way, you want to know where your tax is going. And local government is a way of, a good local government system. It's closer to people. They have a better sense of where their taxes are being spent. They're going to be more interested. It's going to generate media interest. And I think maybe just two final points in terms of, we're very poor at educating people about the work of local government. I'm of an age where I sort of remember civics as a subject. That's largely gone in terms of we tend to talk about local government. There are very few local government programs in our universities. And that's definitely an issue there. And I think the final thing is actually there's very little media interest in local government. Local press has been declining for quite a period, and particularly in Dublin, you know, we don't have the same equivalent tradition of, say, the Examiner, you know, which is, you know, it's a great Cork newspaper. You know, that's not necessarily the same in Dublin, where you actually have, you know, I think we have a Dublin correspondent for, I think, RTE and maybe the Irish Times, but there's not a huge amount of interest, and what interest tends to be there tends to be quite reactive and negative. Sorry, I'm conscious that we're probably lots of questions.
No, sorry, you look at things like the abolition of the town councils that I referred to in 2014. That issue didn't resonate in Dublin because Dublin, I think, just had Balbrigg in it, had only one town council. So because it didn't resonate in Dublin, it got no media profile, no coverage, no debate. They were just swept away.
Thanks for that, Vincent, and your table. Now, table 7, please, if you could ask your question. Just introduce yourself, please, before you do. Thank you.
My name is Valerie, and the question is, do you think the government is willing to share or dilute their decision-making structures, and what does that look like? And we mean, like, if you have the mayor responsible for transport, well, you have a minister for transport, so how will they, you know, divvy out the decisions or the work?
Yeah, I think the first thing, it's the cultural shift. So there's probably some of us of an age remember the Minister for Transport, who was a Dublin TD, giving out about Dublin City Council signposts about 2007, 2008. That to me is a reflection of sort of, you know, if you think you control something, you'll always be willing to comment. So I think the first thing is a cultural shift where ministers go, actually, this is not my business. This is the business of the councillors and the council and the staff of the council that report to that council. So that's a cultural, psychological move. And we're capable of doing it. Like anybody who remembers the Freedom of Information legislation, that's probably not maybe a bit of a clumsy analogy, but the first thing was, it's the cultural, psychological shift that you move from your default is to holding back information to your default is to sharing information. And I think that's where we need to be, is where the default is that powers flow down rather than be retained in government departments. As to the second part, is there a willingness? Again, I would be hopeful. I think what we saw with the plebiscites in Limerick and the scrutiny process in the Oireachtas, I think was really, really positive. Our national politicians engaged, and I think in a really sort of robust exercise in looking at draft legislation that was coming from the department. They worked with a lot of local groups and with the council and with the councillors. So I would be hopeful that the willingness is there. As to what that looks like, you know, after the sort of cultural, psychological shift, it's going to depend on the department. But I think the willingness is there, so I would be hopeful.
Yeah, I think we're at the start of a process here, so I think we need to be optimistic and trust that if the government puts something in its programme that they would like it to happen. Historically, if you were to look at it, you would be a bit more negative because there's been no tendency really from central government to hand things down to local government. And I think it's interesting when we talk about central government, obviously we're talking about the Oireachtas. Also, I think the civil service through the Custom House are quite controlling of local authorities as well. So it is that cultural shift, as Deiric said, kind of a mindset change. You know, our system is kind of a very Anglo-Saxon model, which is based on top-down governance. So everything is controlled by the top through central government, and a few crumbs go downwards. Whereas other models, like in Scandinavia, it's the complete opposite. They're based on what we would call the principle of subsidiarity. So everything that's possible is done at the lowest level. If for reasons of economy of scale or finance they cannot do it, it goes up to the next level. So you look at the most basic level in Denmark, for example, the more town council type level would have responsible for primary education. The county type level would have responsibility for second level education, and then third level is for the region or the state. So you start on the basis as much as possible should be done locally, and then we'll pass it upwards. Whereas unfortunately, we're in the opposite place. and it probably won't change that quickly, but something like a directly elected mayor, could be a step in that process, hopefully.
Thanks for that question. Really, really important. Do we have a follow-on down below? No. Do you want to come in? Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say that I never voted in my life, and I'm nearly 25 now. One of the reasons that I've never voted is because of the party system. And I just would never vote for any of these parties who have their agendas, their history, where they're coming from, etc. And then the lack of clout that independents effectively have because of the party system. And I'm just wondering, do we ever look at that? Do we ever, why do we follow that system where they just squabble just on the basis of their tribal allegiance? It just seems such an antiquated way to actually have true democracy. And just one other quick comment on this. This was to the first question from table 2, really. Just about the democratic, how does it feed down? One amazing thing, I don't know about other countries, maybe you can comment on it, but we can bet on the outcome of elections. I had somebody one time telling me they were going to vote for such and such a party, and I was curious where that came from. And they told me, well, they have a bet on. So obviously they're going to bet the one that they want to win. So just things like that we have in our system just seem to be really so counter to what we hopefully are trying to achieve.
Yeah, good points made, and let's try and capture all those. Just on the point of subsidiarity, in high-performance sports team, it's a key concept of to gain control. You push. To gain control, you must lose control. You must empower those beneath you, and it's interesting that I think we're going to explore that maybe on a different day. So thanks for that. Next question is, I think this is table 10. Excuse the typo. Table 10, and over to you.
My name is Nicole. I suppose our question was, with member states like Denmark, where the spend is significantly more on local government, I think you were saying it was something like 60%. I suppose, what's the measurable impact on where that money goes? Like, is crime lower? Is education better in comparison to what we have in Ireland at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's a big question. I mean, it comes back to your kind of philosophical position about the role of the state. So, yes, spending in Denmark is very high in terms of the state generally, and particularly high in terms of local government. But I suppose there are different reasons for that. One is that they believe in a lot of state provision as opposed to private provision and privatization or contracting out, etc. And accordingly then, as I was saying, they have a bottom-up approach. So there's so much done at local level that you would expect then quite a high proportion of governmental spending is at the lower level. But like, we don't exist kind of in a Narnia world. In Scandinavia, they pay very high taxes and they get excellent public services in return. So they can expect to be paying more than 50% into 60% of their income to a local taxation regime and a state taxation regime. But it comes back to that kind of line, like, what do we think is the role of the state? How much do we think should be provided in terms of public services, and how much do we think should be provided maybe through other mechanisms? So even though obviously you can look at the figures, and it's what I gave this morning, roughly 8% in Ireland, about 64% in Denmark, you're not comparing like and like in a lot of ways. Because they're coming from a totally different perspective in terms of how they view the world and how much of services they feel should be coming through the state and the public sector. But yeah, you have to pay for excellent public services is a lesson from Scandinavia as well. Yep.
It's a really good question, and to further your reading into this particular subject, we're going to be creating an Assembly members library where any documents that where their expert advisory group recommend, or indeed that you might come across as part of your research, we can upload them, either create a link or have the Adobe file online for you to download. One of them on this particular point, there's a very good paper I'm not advocating for force of the trade union, but they did write a paper on local government. And they give an example such as this in terms of what Denmark, I think might be Norway, might have been the example that their local government structure, they provide the healthcare, the nursing homes, swimming pools, etc., as opposed to our model, which is either privatisation or central government. So that might be a good read on this particular question. Okay, next one is table 3. Over to you.
We defer to Breed.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, because I didn't want to ask the question anyway.
So I think Breed is covering it, but do you want me to say something? Yeah, do you want to?
Yeah, I suppose the closest analogy, I think it's meant to be like a minister and a secretary general in a department, that you have the political leader and sort of then the person who's sort of in charge of operational matters and administrative matters. I suppose the difference in the local government system is the chief executive tends to be there for a number of years, 7 or 10, and the mayor rotates on an annual basis and may come from a different party. So that the relationship, the power relationship or the influence relationship is very much oriented towards the chief executive rather than the mayor, which is quite distinct from the minister and the secretary general. And I think in the Limerick legislation, they did look at the Secretaries and Secretaries and Ministers Act from 1924 to look at that, because that's the basis. But it evolved, and I think it's been an ongoing issue in the Limerick discussions, particularly the pre-legislative scrutiny in the Iraq. This is what's the appropriate relationship. So I think there's probably material that can be made available there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's interesting that if we talk about an entity like Dublin City Council, legally the council means the elected members. So they are meant to be the supreme decision makers. The administrative staff, the chief executive, the professional planners and engineers, they are there to support the councillors. That is what the law states. Now again, the reality is probably going to be a bit more kind of nuanced than that, but perhaps the councillors at times maybe need to exercise their power as well a bit more. And I think relating back to the first question about kind of raising the profile of local government, I think local authorities could do a bit more here themselves as well in terms of promoting their good news stories, boasting a bit more, because most of what they do is terrific, but unfortunately the coverage tends to be more on the mishaps. And also I think they can push back a bit more against central government. Even though we know we have a highly centralised system, I think local authorities at times could grasp the nettle, take more of an initiative, and then ask for forgiveness afterwards from central government. Sometimes I think they're too compliant and they're willing to kind of accept that they are subordinate to central government. And of course they are subordinate. The problem is that they shouldn't be subservient.
Thank you. Brian has a follow-up question.
Just in terms of the actual decision-making relationship, how that actually works as opposed to how it should work, because...
Well, again, legally it's very straightforward. When it comes to policy matters, the councillors are in charge. So if the councillors, and again, planning is an easy enough example, if councillors propose to zone a piece of land for whatever reason, the chief executive and the chief executive's planners and staff can give their guidance and advice and say to the councillors, we wouldn't recommend you do this, but yet the councillors can do it. So again, it comes back to the fact that they are meant to be the supreme decision makers. But as Deiric was saying, there is an imbalance there in terms of the permanency of the staff within the local authority and the fact that councillors, part-timers, they only, they might just have a 5-year term. The Lord Mayor or Mayor only has a 1-year term. So there is that imbalance. And that is partly going to be addressed, hopefully, through a directly elected mayor.
Thanks, we'll be covering this in much more detail this afternoon with Dr. Breed Quinn will cover, who governs and how is that power distributed at 4 o'clock. But so we'll go back into this detail. It's a very important question. So we've a little bit of time, maybe for one question. Out of the we've only covered off 4 questions out of the 100, so there's 96 left. So we might take one. If anybody has a question, would like to ask their question right now. You've got the you've got the momentum. You've got the 2 experts at the top table. So we're going to go over to table number
7, is it?
7, is it?
Yeah, 7.
7. Thank you.
Okay, first of all, my name is Barry Saul. I'm a councillor in Donegal. The question is in relation to the question, will it be asked of the citizens of Dublin, do they want a directly elected mayor or not? And I suppose the background is, a number of years ago, Cork, Waterford and Limerick had a plebiscite, and the formal question was put to them at the local and European elections. Do you want a directly elected mayor for Cork? Yes or no? In Cork and Waterford, they said no. In Limerick, they said yes, and preparations are undergoing for a Limerick directly elected mayor competition. But given the Oireachtas have set terms of reference for us in terms of to look at the different models of directly elected mayor and look at the structures of the local government the local government system in Dublin, the question I have here, will Dublin citizens get the opportunity to say yes or no? And should they, like Cork, Limerick and Waterford were asked? Thanks.
Yeah, from before I hand over to the AAG, just from the as the chairman of the assembly group, we have been asked to consider the type of directly elected Lord Mayor. Of course, if part of our deliberations, from my perspective, and again we can push this to the steering group, if we collectively consider, well, that is not a good idea, we'll obviously reflect that in our deliberations. With regards to the plebiscite, that's, I think, outside of our remit. It's probably something for the houses of the Oireachtas to consider. However, we can make recommendations, I would believe, in that regard. But again, this is something that we need to decide collectively. I'll steer the ship, but you need to come up with the answers and how we navigate that course. I'll hand over now to A and Deiric if they want to fill anything in.
I think Jim has answered it pretty effectively. I don't think at the moment, from anything that I've read, it's stitched into the process that there will be a plebiscite in Dublin. But obviously it is something in your deliberations that you might make that recommendation in your final report, and then obviously it is up to government itself. You could argue that the processes in Cork, Limerick and Waterford and now in Dublin have both been kind of a bit lopsided in the sense that Cork, Waterford and Limerick got a plebiscite without the benefit of something like a citizens' assembly to iron out the details. So a lot of people were saying we don't have a clue what we're voting on. And in Dublin we have a citizens' assembly and no guarantee necessarily that it will lead to a plebiscite. But the short answer is that ultimately it's something that you could put into your final document if you felt that was the way to go. The alternative is, of course, you just make a series of proposals that go directly to government and they will make the decisions anyway.
What he said.
So just to conclude that piece, we've got we've got about, yeah, please go ahead, and please, if you could again just announce yourself. Thank you.
My name is Meena. Not always putting it out to the public might be the best way, because like you said, I agree, they might not know what they're saying yes or no to. You know, Brexit, things like that happen when people say yes, but they don't know what they're saying yes to. So I do believe this is a better way of informing people. Maybe more should be involved, but definitely putting it out to the entire population might not be the best way to go for something like this. That'll be my view.
Thank you for that. And again, we'll share all the views, but we will eventually come up with a solid position that will represent the totality of the group. So none of us, including myself, will dominate the direction of travel or how we navigate. Okay, so thank you very much for that.